Hello, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. We just had a couple of technical difficulties, but I think we've sorted them out. Um, but it's a real privilege to share this virtual space with you all today. My name is Thomas West, and I have the pleasure of serving as executive director of the Peace Studio. Thank you so much for being with us. This event, The Life and Legacy of John Lewis, a Man of Peace and Justice, is part of our larger Peace Studio Summit that's happening throughout this week, which is a series of 12 virtual events that will celebrate, of course, the International Day of Peace today and the culmination of the Peace Studio's 100 Offerings of Peace campaign, which since July 1 has been commissioning creatives across 20 countries to generate new works around what peace means to them amidst COVID-19 and the powerful protests over centuries-old racial injustices happening across the globe. And so before I have the honor of introducing our extraordinary panelists and our moderator today, I just have a couple of tech notes to share. Given that this event is being held more intimately via Zoom meeting instead of webinar, please do keep yourself muted at all times unless you're called on at the end of the event to ask a question verbally. We will be having a brief Q&A session at the end with the participants. So if you can plan to use the raise your hand button via your Zoom platform, that would be easiest. And then either Tremaine, our wonderful moderator, or our Zoom technician, Marcus, will make note of them. Given the size of the group, we won't be able to get to everyone's questions, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. And so without further ado, it's really one of the honors of my life to be able to introduce today's moderator and panelists. Starting first with our panelists, we have Reverend Otis Moss III, who's the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. Dr. Moss is part of a new generation of ministers committed to preaching a prophetic message of love and justice. Today is my first time having the pleasure of meeting Reverend Moss in person, but as a young singer studying at Chautauqua, I had the honor of hearing him preach on a number of occasions. So really thrilled to have him with us today. Then we have Zernona Clayton, American civil rights icon and broadcasting executive. She is the founder and CEO of the Trumpet Awards Foundation. She was instrumental in the development of the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame that was developed by the foundation to honor the achievements of African Americans as advocates. And she was a dear friend of Congressman Lewis. So it's a really incredible gift to have her with us today. Also thrilled to have the brother of the late Congressman Grant Lewis with us. Grant, it's so tremendous to have you with us. Thank you for your participation in this event. We have one more panelist who is on the way, just had something urgent come up this morning, but we think will be able to join us in a little bit, particularly for the Q&A, and that's Governor Deval Patrick, who served as the 71st governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to 2015. He is a civil rights lawyer and author and a businessman, and he's a former 2020 presidential candidate. And one of my all-time favorite memories was getting to sit with him for breakfast at his home in the Berkshires last summer. So really excited that he will be with us shortly. And then finally, I'm really thrilled that we have Tremaine Lee, the Pulitzer Prize and Emmy Award-winning journalist and correspondent for MSNBC with us to moderate this incredibly special panel today. Tremaine covers social justice issues and the role of race, violence, politics, and law enforcement, among other powerful stories at MSNBC. And if you haven't heard his incredible podcast in America, I highly recommend it. It's truly extraordinary. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tremaine. Thank you so much.
Thomas, thank you very much for that very warm introduction. It is truly an honor of mine to moderate this panel as we reflect and celebrate and commemorate the life and legacy of John Lewis, who was, small in stature physically, but a true giant, a mountain of a man, even in the darkest of times. And the one thing that John Lewis was, among many other things, was filled and exuding of hope. And we think about these dark times we're in now, with COVID-19 having a disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities, America's racial reckoning, trying to decide and wrestling over who we are, who we've been, and who we say we want to become, but also the economic downturn. And I wonder, and I want to ask our panelists, in the midst of this moment, and let's not forget 40-some days away from perhaps one of the most consequential presidential elections in a generation or two, if not more, how do we instill a sense of hope in this dark time that we will push through, that we will find a way, And I want to start with you, Ms. Clayton.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here. I think it's very difficult. We're going through things now that we've never had before. But I guess since we have this illustrious minister on the panel with us, he'll probably tell us that we're supposed to have hope. Um, if you're strong in your faith, strong in your beliefs, then somehow you feel we'll get through it. And it's very difficult for all of us to have to abide by the guidelines that have been set for us in our own communities. But just personally, knowing that we've got dark days, we've had them before, but they're darker now than I think we've had. That's my opinion. I just had a birthday last week, so I'm looking at 90 years old now. And I feel even older when I see Reverend Otis Moss here because I know his parents so well and work with them. Um, but I think that we just have to find a way, just find a way to keep our heads high in spite of the darkness we are wandering in. And I think we can come up with one. Find a light spot in a dark world.
Reverend Moss, where do we find that light spot in the dark world that Ms. Clayton so eloquently spoke of? Like, how do we find it when folks are in the midst of this darkness and their faith and their hope has been shaken? How do we find it?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be on this program and have this conversation with such incredible people, and to talk about the moral compass for our community, for our nation. The Honorable John Lewis, and I take a page from what Sister Clayton mentioned, that we discover hope by reaching back. In the African tradition, it calls Sankofa, reaching back in order to go forward. And when we witness the challenges of our ancestors, we cannot do anything but have hope. I'll say it this way. John Lewis and his family, born in Troy, Alabama, the crushing effects of poverty, but yet Troy was shaped by the resistance of the Creek Nation. And that resistance, I believe, rested in the spirit of the Lewis family. Goes on to Fisk University, which is this beautiful, lovely water of education where Du Bois graduates, Constance Baker Motley, Judith Jameson, Nikki Giovanni, then on to American Baptist Theological Seminary, a Black seminary set up to educate not just Black ministers, but ministers who would have a liberation focus. So there is John Lewis and James Bevel, who has a professor in the street, I should say, by the name of C.T. Vivian, and along with Kelly Miller Smith and others of that level. And so they come out of a tradition where they face tragedy, but they don't fall into despair. And we cannot face the tragic moment that we're in and fall into despair. We have to reach back and look at people like Harriet Tubman. Would she say, hang your head, or would she say that I pass the baton on to you so that you can do something greater than what I've done? I think that's where we find hope. Look back in order to go forward.
Mr. Lewis, we heard a little bit of the biography of your late brother, the Honorable John Lewis, and we saw the images of him being beaten and him laying his body literally on the line for us all to be better. Where did your brother, get that well, that seemingly endless well of hope, and how do we find a way for us to tap into some of that, especially now? The unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I really feel we get that hope. As African Americans, we know we've come through some tough times, and we found trust in God. First of all, we have to trust in God to help us get through these tough times. And as John would say, don't give up, don't give in. Keep your eyes on the prize. And our prize is getting through some of these tough times. We're going through times that we've never seen before. We're going through COVID. We're going through all kind of injustices still. And he fought his entire life for these unfair situations that we found ourselves in. And he never gave up. Matter of fact, I think as he was getting older, he got stronger in what he believed in. And he's always said to his siblings, when you see something that's not right, say something. And you know, when the congressman was getting knocked down, he was getting knocked down, true enough, but he had to be standing up for something to get knocked down. So that tells me at an early age, he saw these injustices, he saw these unfair situations that African Americans were going through, and he knew it was not right. So he felt that he had to do something. And he continued to fight that fight until the day he died. He once told me, I think I'm going to fight this fight until they pull my boots off.
Wow.
And he did just that. And at the end, they pulled his boots off. But we found with all the op-eds and stuff, he was still fighting that fight that he started fighting years ago. He had a lot of faith. And I think the congressman's political career and all of the things that he accomplished was actually just an extension of his faith. Because where many people really know it or not, his faith was extremely strong.
You know, they say faith without works is dead. And we know for a fact that John Lewis, along with so many other people, really put in work, really put in actionable ideas. They put into action, I should say, those ideas of freedom and justice and hope. Reverend Moss, I wonder, when we think about that kind of work that accompanies faith, the hard work, are there action items, things that people can do that actually could lead to change? Are there things every day that we can take part in, to push the ball forward? And if so, what are they?
No, absolutely. We're at a moment in history now where all of the gains that have been put forth by people like Sister Clayton and John Lewis and Bernard Lafayette and Diane Nash are under threat. It's not enough to be an armchair critiquer of what is happening in American democracy. You have to involve yourself. So one thing is you have to vote. I say this to some people who have taken cynicism as their position. And I had a conversation with someone who was a radical cynic. And this gentleman was talking about, I'm not voting. It doesn't make a difference on one side or the other. And I raised the question with the person. I said, well, you were protesting with us in reference to Laquan McDonald and the 16 shots. I said, did you believe that we needed a new attorney general? He said, yeah, absolutely. I said, we could only get a new, state's attorney when we decided to vote. I said to another a person who was saying that they were not going to vote, I said, well, in your county, the only way you can get on a jury is you got to be registered to vote. So then how are you going to be radical on one end and a cynic on the other? So we have to take voting seriously. We have to take voting suppression seriously. We have to take the hacking of this nation seriously. And we have to take seriously the fact that our democracy is at risk. It has never been perfect. We are a house that is being built. We are the yet to be United States of America. And so I believe that one of the first pieces is that we need a radical, powerful voting movement to ensure that we protect the rights of everyone in this nation.
Thank you, Reverend Moss. I believe we have Mr. Duvall Patrick.
I'm here, and I apologize to everyone for being late. Life intervened today.
No, we're all obviously and certainly happy to have you. And I just want to jump right in with you. You just got in the door, so you didn't get a chance to take your jacket off, and I'm already asking questions. But as we think about the life and legacy of the Honorable John Lewis, who was filled with faith and filled with hope, but he also put in a lot of action and work in pushing the ball forward for America. And I wonder, in his spirit, are there things that we can encourage folks to do day in and day out, right here, right now, to kind of, push us closer to the ideal of who we say we want to be as Americans?
Well, I think, first of all, Reverend Moss, as always, was right. I think voting is critical. And I think that in this election in particular, where to me, more than the character of the candidates is at issue, this time it's the character of the country, that we're going to have to win and win overwhelmingly. An incoming administration needs to feel and claim a mandate to make fundamental change. And so, as inconvenient as it is, I think about John Lewis and think that the inconveniences that many of us face are nothing compared to what he faced and faced down. And so we owe it to him and the legacy that he's left to us to show up and get involved, and then to get everyone we know involved, every family member, every friend. Check your registration. People who think they are registered may not be because of purging as a feature of the strategy of suppression. And then I think the other thing is we're going to have to come to appreciate that real politics is constant advocacy. That's something else I think John Lewis taught us. We can't vote and then go back into a slouch and feel disappointed if stuff doesn't happen. The people we vote in need to feel our heat in between elections, and we need to be prepared to hold them accountable if they don't deliver.
Ms. Clayton, I'm going to ask you, in the face of everything going on, and we're certainly trying to tap into these wells of faith and hope, but for many people, it just seems insurmountable. How do we encourage those folks who either believe that they can't participate in making real change happen, or just the mountain is too big? How do we get to those folks?
I was just reminded as Mr. Patrick was talking. I asked John, and I was there most of the times when he was knocked down, but we would just sit around the table at his house one night, and I said, John, how did you really feel when they knocked you down? And his answer was, I knew I had to get up. I've thought about that a lot, just taking those words. When I was going around, one of my many jobs at SCLC was during the voting season, we were trying to encourage people, please go and vote. And most times they were in bed, didn't even get up. And that had pained me a lot that they wouldn't even get up. And I finally said, if you looked at any of those pictures of folk who, like Dr. C.T. Vivian and others, who were beaten so severely trying to just register to get us the opportunity to vote, blood running down their heads. And that doesn't touch you, nothing will. But then I used John's words. While they're sleeping, I said, you could afford to sleep because you didn't have any place to go in those early years because you couldn't vote. And now it's time for you to get up. Start there, just get up. Head toward the voting booths. And then make your voice be heard. You don't have a choice. Voting is a necessity. And if nothing more than just to look back in your memory bank and see the blood that has been shed for us as African Americans to get the right to vote, there's no way you'll stay down, you'll get up.
Mr. Lewis, these are certainly consequential times, and there's so much at stake, and there is a lot of gloom and a lot of darkness, but there are folks all across this country who are tapping in to the spirit of peace and the spirit of progress to continue to build on the legacy of John Lewis. And I want to ask you, what are you most hopeful for in this moment? Is there a silver lining? Is there something through all the despair that gives you a sense of pride and hope?
Yes, of course. When I was much younger, I remember the congressman and others, sweeping across the South, encouraging people to vote. The congressman being 12 years older than I am, I was a very young boy at the time, and I used to wonder what was it all about. And as I, grew older, I come to realize how important and what an important task they had before them, sweeping across the South at a very dangerous time, because it was dangerous for them to just be encouraging people to vote. And they just kept going and going. And his legacy would be well served if African Americans, especially, would get up, stand up, walk to the polls, crawl to the polls, drive to the polls, whatever way it takes for you to get to the polls, get to the poll and vote. Because without voting, we really don't have a whole lot of voice. And we would serve his legacy well by keeping voting rights going, because we have to remember a lot of those rights that the congressman fought for are really trying to be taken away from us. So we have to stay true to what he believed in, voting, equal rights, inequalities. But voting helps all of those just by voting. And I agree with you. You can't just vote. You got to continue to make the people you vote for be responsible for what they're saying they're going to do. So it's not just voting. You have to be prepared to stay the course.
And let me jump in and say, a woman was talking about going out to vote. They said, well, if you don't vote, your vote is still counting, because your non-voting will go into a category of somebody you really did not want. So
That's right.
you're still voting.
That's right.
Right.
Can I jump in and just build on that point? I think one of the, if it's all right, Tremaine,
Of course.
one of the things that was, I think, so remarkable about John Lewis is that he was able to keep urgency and the long view in kind of equipoise. I remember years ago representing 3 of the people from Perry County who worked with John organizing the march in 1965, Spencer Hogue and Mr. and Mrs. Albert Turner. And over the years, they'd stayed involved in Selma County, organizing the Black vote and using absentee ballots. And they had finally, after years of working to overcome the apathy, had finally gotten enough power in the Black vote to elect the first countywide Black official. And Ronald Reagan was elected president, and he sent his Justice Department down to indict the 3 of them for vote fraud. We tried that case in the federal courthouse, the window overlooking the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I remember calling up the congressman and asking about what he remembered of the potential witnesses who could help us give some historical perspective to what it took to build this power over, what was it then, 25 years. And I remember him saying he foresaw that there would be consequences, ultimately, for our harnessing and using this power, but those consequences were a part of the journey toward justice. And that very theme became a big part of our successful closing argument, and they were acquitted on all counts. So I love right now the urgency that we hear from so many young people who are out in the streets right now of all kinds of backgrounds, folks who are insisting, sort of putting their collective foot down, that a nation that is dedicated to liberty and justice for all really needs to mean what it says, but also understanding that we get to where we must go step by step, and having both of those concepts in balance is an unusual thing, and I think John Lewis taught us that.
Let me follow up with you and just ask you this. You think about how the machine does not bend or bow easily at all. And John Lewis starting off as an activist and pushing and then becoming a politician. Is there a sweet spot in engaging with the politics? Because many folks will get cynical and say, I'm coming from here from this altruistic place, but then I get in the machine and there's a lot of funny business. What's the sweet spot?
So I think, first of all, John Lewis never stopped being an advocate.
Right.
He went inside and became an advocate. That's not true of everybody, but that was true of him. I can tell you that having had just one elected position when I ran for governor, the energy that we had in that campaign, I wish we'd been able to sustain when I was in office, because I think, frankly, this is to a point I was making earlier, Tremaine, being pushed from the outside is a part of how we make that machine function differently and better. Rather than just kind of putting our democracy on automatic pilot.
And I would add that John Lewis's spiritual compass, his moral compass, was such an important part of
Right.
of who he was. What I love about John Lewis is that we forget that when he was younger, those who were moderate and conservative thought he was way too radical, and those who were radical thought he was too moderate. He was always able, in a very powerful way, to bring different sides together and meld those pieces and to say, okay, for those of you who are the NAACP and just think the SALC is, just not your thing, let me show you what they can do. And for those of you in SNCC who are moving toward Black power and Black nationalism, let me show you how important what you're saying in this moment, how important it is. And he could bring those things together. And that was a spiritual skill. That's not something that you go to school to develop. That's a spiritual skill, to be able to hear and listen to the hearts of people and the spirits of people. And at the same time to say, we are building something bigger than something that's just for our tribe.
I think we're seeing some of those same dynamics play out now with Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black lives more generally. Some say, it's too much, too fast. Let's still take small steps. Others are saying, you know what? Our patience is run thin. Let's do this now. Is there any advice in the spirit of John Lewis and the spirit of Dr. King and the spirit of the pendulum swinging, right? And the arc always bending towards justice. Is there some advice that you can give for the younger generation of activists who are still out there pushing?
I heard, and it was interesting, one of the first times I heard John Lewis when I was in college at Morehouse. And he was making some of the same comments that you were making right there. Said, let me give you all some advice. Let me share some wisdom. It was him and also Andrew Young. They stated, you're young, you better be radical. He said, you're supposed to be radical because it's your job to ensure that we do not become complacent, that we don't rest on our laurels. It was really powerful. And to be able to hear John Lewis not only speak those words, but then those of us, we were operating within in our radical sphere, he was able to take parts of what we were saying and say that that's good, but what are you going to build for people who are not yet born? I love your rhetoric, but what's your structure? What's your advocacy? What's your piece that you're going to do? And so I would say to those activists right now, go on with your bad self. Be as radical as you can and begin to build and think and dream. And the greatest casualty of colonialism and racism and white supremacy is the casualty of the imagination. That if you can't imagine a new world, then we might as well be dead. So keep on imagining is what I would say.
So, Ms. Clayton, Reverend Moss says, go with your bad self, be radical. What do you say to these young folks? You were out there, in the 60s onward and even before. What do you say to this next generation?
Well, I came from that generation where the philosophy of Martin Luther King was so strong. He believed in nonviolence. And so you can see that we can take some credits for having some good legislation passed in our direction. We never burned anybody's house down because he didn't believe in violence. I'm disturbed today that in spite of the fact that I think that the pleasure that I feel now is seeing young people get up and do something pleases me greatly. I just regret that we've got the violence uh, as such a strong part of it. Um, and it every time I see the destruction, I pain inside because I reflect on the fact that Dr. King, with his planning, never went out in the streets until we had some thorough planning. And maybe that's how we were able to avoid the violence from our side of the ledger. There was violence, however, but we didn't promote it, weren't active in it. And I'm sorry that we're seeing so much of that today because we're um, destroying physical structures and physical existences. And I just wish we'd do more in trying to change people's hearts and their minds because I'm of the strong philosophy myself personally that if you change a man's heart, you can regulate his behavior. And I know you must know that I'm the one who has the story to tell about how I'm the one who changed the heart and the behavior of the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. It was one of the biggest stories that took place. But I guess I have that as an example that you can change people, but we got to change their hearts some kind of way before we can see the change in behavior. So I pain with that, but I'm glad to see them get out there and do something.
Well, Ms. Clay, let me ask you this. You know, Dr. King famously said, and I'm sure I might butcher the quote, but that the riot is kind of the voice of the unheard or neglected. Does that speak what we're seeing now in terms of sometimes you have peaceful protesters, and then on the other hand, you have things getting out of control? Does that speak, or is that kind of symbolizing just how much hasn't changed in terms of the level of despair that folks are having? Have we had enough change since the days of you all fighting?
Well, I think that when we look at our existence, we know for certain that we haven't changed enough. Our society hasn't changed in the right direction. I was just reading this morning. I'm a voracious reader, and I start off with 6 newspapers in the morning to see who's doing what where. And just this morning, we have a woman who's running for um, an office, and she's asking for, um, uh, I guess, a pardon, so to speak, that she used to be um, a racist. She's a white candidate, but now she's changed. And she said, but I was accosted by all black men. The only um, affront that she's had been as a result of black men's behavior. But she'd never been raped or accosted by a white man, and that still remains her today. And then reading that, I just said, well, she hasn't really changed that much. She's still saying that now the people who did her harm were all black. And if she's got to refer to it, she hasn't really changed that much. That was my assessment. Maybe I'm not that smart. But it seemed like to me we got to keep on working to change the people's hearts, change their thinking. We're entitled to equity in this country. The law has provided it for us as African Americans. So we have a right to be here. We have a right to have access to the democracy of our country. We have a right to share in the richness of this country. So we have a right that everybody else has. All people have the rights. And we as African Americans ought to have it too. So I can understand the dissatisfaction of young people today. They don't feel like we have gotten it. Well, we haven't. And we haven't gotten it fast enough that which we perhaps have gotten. So I'm kind of torn myself as to where my criticism really is, because I'm so glad to see them out. I used to criticize young people for not being active enough. Now they're pretty active. And so you can't have it both ways. So I'm kind of, but I do hate the balance. Then going and living under Martin Luther King's direction, you feel strongly that violence is not the way.
progress hasn't come without getting into some trouble. And we've all heard of John Lewis's, one of his favorite quotes of this idea of good trouble. And I will actually read the quote because I love the quote so much. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And Mr. Lewis, I want to ask you, hearing that quote from your brother, and I wonder, what kind of good trouble have you gotten into? I want to ask you all this, but I want to start with you, Mr. Lewis. Is there good trouble that you're most proud of getting into?
Yes, I have participated in the marches across the Edmonds Pettus Bridge on the anniversary every year. Um, Definitely hadn't gotten in as much good trouble as my brother John did, but I felt a sense of pride when I was crossing the bridge, even though it was peaceful. I still thought it was good trouble because of the serious trouble they got in back years ago, and realizing that if they hadn't gotten in that good trouble, there's some trouble that we've gone through now that we wouldn't have been able to. It would have been serious trouble. But I'm just so proud of the fact that the congressman's good trouble actually started in Troy, Alabama, mm-hmm. when he attempted to go to the Troy University and was denied. And later on, Troy University awarded him with honorary doctorate degree. The thing about the congressman, he never did give up. He just kept fighting. He kept fighting. The good trouble that he got in when he was doing the sit-ins at Fisk University. A lot of that good trouble I was seeing on TV, seeing the clips, knowing that he was in some serious trouble. When he was being arrested, I used to hear my mother praying, take care of those protesters, including her son, and not realizing then that was good trouble. I just saw it as trouble, but it was good trouble, necessary trouble. And if they hadn't gotten in that trouble, a lot of things that we've been enjoying these last years, we wouldn't have. So I think my good trouble actually was being proud of seeing my brother get into good trouble and being so proud to be a part of his life has made my life that much rewarding. And he was so strong in his belief till it was real unmeasurable. He just felt like he had to keep his eyes on the prize. He was a strong force, and at the same time, he was so humble, so humble. He could disagree and still make you feel real special, and that takes a special character in a person to do that. I've seen him even in Washington, disagree and go across the aisle and talk to the gentleman that he disagreed with. And that made me feel real proud.
Mr. Patrick, I'm gonna ask you the same thing. What good trouble have you gotten into that you're most proud of?
Oh, mercy.
That sounds like a lot of trouble. It's like you got yourself in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I've been a lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and head of the Civil Rights Division. I've been an executive in 2 Fortune 50 companies and a governor, and I've gotten in good trouble in every single one of those jobs. And I think I got comfortable with. I can tell you stories like, when I sued a guy who was governor of Arkansas named Bill Clinton because it was too hard to register. And we ultimately made a settlement which became the bones of the Motor Voter Act when he was elected. I think that was pretty good trouble. I think I got comfortable with the idea of good trouble, that I could go inside an institution and still make trouble, when I began to appreciate that being radical, as distinct from, and I know this is not the point that Sister Clayton was making, as distinct from violent, but radical is completely consistent with Christ's own example. That, you know, having a moral core, not leaving your conscience at the door was what was expected of me as a Christian. And so it didn't feel like, it might have been disruptive, but it didn't feel like, it felt like it was what I was called for, what I was supposed to do.
Reverend Moss, you know, you walk in some footsteps of some troublemakers, right? And in your faith walk, and even Jesus was flipping tables every now and again, right? But what good trouble are you most proud of? And how do folks find the strength in their faith to get in that kind of trouble that says, you know what, even though the odds are daunting, even though there's a lot at stake, I can do this. I can get in this kind of trouble.
I believe in good trouble and holy mischief that we're supposed to be involved in.
Holy mischief, I like that one.
Yeah, good trouble and holy mischief. That's the call. And if you're a person of faith, it means that you're called to good trouble and holy mischief. That if you are in the Christian tradition, you are following someone who is always in holy mischief and good trouble. You're talking about a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew who flipped over tables, as you said, and was also a part of the mass incarceration system as a result of Rome, and was executed by the state. So you have to have a completely different framework if you're a person of faith. You've always got to be on the side of the radical and always on the side of the oppressed and those who are broken. And I'm very humbled and proud at the same time of the good trouble that and the holy mischief I've gotten into. We paid off 5,000 families their medical debt. We just arrested that medical debt that they had, put it to rest. We got in trouble with the Fraternal Order of Police when we demanded that some things would be defunded, specifically the Cook County Jail, which is the largest mental health facility in the United States. It makes no sense that we end up incarcerating people who need public health. We got into good trouble when we made a demand of the city that we not only would repair the Carter G. Woodson Library, but you were going to take people who come out of the mass incarceration system to do all of the work and find the money for it. You can find it on the north side, let's find it on the south side, and also make it sustainable at the same time. We got in good trouble with the city when we decided to purchase 27 acres and say that we're going to develop a sustainable community, but it has to have people from the mass incarceration system doing all of the work. It must all be Black contractors, and women must be the principals. And the city said it's never been done. We said, well, a small little church down the street did it. Why can't the city do it? If we can do it with limited resources, why can't the city do it? So holy mischief and good trouble, I believe, is part of the call of every person of faith.
So Reverend Moss, you're saying that Jesus is the OG troublemaker. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Come on now. Yes, absolutely.
That's all right. I want to thank you all again. This has been amazing. I could literally do this all day, but I want to make sure we turn to our viewers and our audience members with any questions they might have. So let's open the floor up for some Q&A. I think if you want to ask a question, just hit that wave button and we'll make sure we let you in.
Fantastic. Let's start with Mamie Kisner. Mamie, do we still have you on the call?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My question is for Ms. Clayton. Ms. Clayton, you have been a long time, over 40 years, close friend and worked with Congressman John Lewis. What charge can you give us that you feel that John would want us to share with others? And then secondly, how can all of us motivate the younger generations to work together for pushing the right to vote and making a difference in this world?
Thank you. We are sitting in the presence of former governor. And I want you to know that you have been such an example. You almost paint the picture of please vote, which is John's preachment all the time. John meant what he said about go and vote. We have the examples that bring us such pride as African Americans. And so I was so pleased to have met John Lewis. I met him shortly after he'd come to Atlanta to meet with Dr. King, and we became friends shortly thereafter, and I was his friend till the end. But talking to him was always a pleasure because he had a twist on the facts that were humorous, but had such um, basic analysis that made you feel good in the process. And we often talked about the fact that, you know, God gave each of us the supreme gift, which is life. And when someone gives you a gift, you want to pay them back in some way to let you know you appreciate it. And somehow I always put it, and John and I would talk about this, that we're paying God back with his gift to us by living the good life. I thought about that so many times, and every time John and I would part, I left with some profundity that works so well for your soul that you've got to put into the issues of the day the right amount of energy. And I told young people during John's illness and his final life with us that that was never meant to be, nor was it, a public relations report when we saw John Lewis on every outlet there was, talking about his good life. The quality of his life was something that's inexplicable. It's hard to explain a person having so many good qualities. John had so many wonderful things we could point to as examples. And I spoke to a lot of young people during that time, and I just said that was not public relations, that was John living the life, paying God back for what he'd given us. And so I try to tell people today, it's easy to love each other. And I was telling somebody just the other night that I had an example. I'm always getting black and white groups together trying to talk about the issues of racism. And I had, as a part of our refreshments, I had coffee on the table with one spoon and black and white guests together having coffee. At the end of our meeting, they were talking about the fact, one man said, I want to say something. I've already learned something tonight. I learned that I can use the spoon that a black person had used. I didn't know that was a big issue. That he was going to stir his coffee now with the same spoon that we all use, as if, I guess, people licked the spoon. I don't know what he had in mind. I left there and said, well, listen, let's don't, laugh about it. He learned something. And if everybody learns a little bit, we put all of our little bits together and we'll have some big bits to share with our country and our friends and our circle, that we're never too big, too broad, too busy to do what John said. Let's live the good life.
Fantastic. Let's move to a question from John Swenson. John?
Thank you. I'm John Swenson. I'm faculty at De Anza College. I'm going to leave the meeting in a few minutes and go right to my very first meeting with about 60 of my students. I am so thrilled to be here. I have the last words of John Lewis already incorporated into my class. I thank Pullen for inviting me today. I'm just so impressed to be in your presence and to have learned so much wonderful history. Pullen is coming to my class next week, so I'm going to lean on him to share some of these further. So I really have a thank you more than a question. I'm just so pleased to be here, and thank you very much.
Great. Let's go to Roberta Baskin.
Well, I echo, I'm just so grateful for these reflections on John Lewis's legacy. And I'm thinking about Otis Moss's quote of John Lewis that you're supposed to be radical. And I was recently in a conversation with a very inspiring Hampton University student who reported with dismay that 4 to 5 of the 20 young women in her women's leadership group say that they're voting third party or not voting. And one of these women told her it won't matter because she's registered in New Jersey, where the Electoral College will go for Biden anyway. And I think that young people voting for their future is crucial in this next election. But how do you convince or reach these young voters who feel disenfranchised by the system and intend as a radical statement to throw away their vote?
Wonderful, wonderful question, and a challenging one. What I have found has been very helpful is when I made the statement about the election being hacked and our consciousness being hacked. It's a longer conversation in reference to social media and things of that nature. But talk about the local, that local politics change things on a global scale. The ability to be able to pick your state's attorney, the ability to have the appropriate city council person, and what are those local issues? We do a freedom school every summer at Trinity, and the young people who are part of that, they learn reading. It's a program centered around reading, but also social and community organizing. And so they have to find one issue that they can change. And the young people picked the issue of getting the street lights on because the street lights were off. And they found out that they could change something when they organize together. Instead of going to the presidential, we get so caught up in the presidential, but your local election, who's going to determine whether you have to mark that you used to be a felon? That's not the president, that's local. Who will determine the funding of whether there'll be mental health workers deployed in your community? That's not the president, that's local. Who will determine the funding for your hospital to ensure that people are taken care of? That's not the president, that's local. So if you want sustainable communities, if you don't want water that has lead in it, as in Flint, it's not just the president, it's the local leadership. And the only way that you're going to put pressure on local leadership is you got to be in the fight. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who has been practicing, we say we're in the NBA playoff, practicing to play basketball, but you just refuse to get in the bubble and play ball. So I say, get in the bubble, play ball, do your thing, and change things on the local level, which will have an effect on the national.
May I build on that? I probably not, and certainly not as artfully as Otis did. First of all, I think apathy is a part of the other side's strategy. I think we have internalized the, I think Otis, you referred to it as the hacking of our democracy, of our society, of our sense of community, of common cause by social media. And that is a longer conversation, but it's a conversation worth having. I also think that the folks who say they're going to cast a protest vote or sit it out on account of a protest vote at a time like this, in this election in particular, I want them to ask themselves to think about the folks who can't afford to have them sit it out, for whom it is simply not a luxury to have 4 more years of this and worse, who can't immunize themselves or think they can, who can't immunize themselves the way that young voter thinks he or she may be able to, because they have a college degree or they have a little money or they have some connections and privilege. And in fact, I would say that the economic fragility and social isolation and despair as measured by suicide rates and opioid addiction that has been chronic for generations in Black communities is now being experienced by people all over the country. And what a mistake to miss the opportunity that that confluence of interest presents to be a part of profound and meaningful change. So the vote is just the first thing, just the first thing. And if the candidate, if the nominee is not your perfect nominee, I would say get over that until the day after the election. But be a part of the election and then press those who have been elected into office to deliver.
If I might add, I'm reminded of a story, and I think Sister Clayton probably could help out with the story that I heard my father share. When Dr. King was arrested and sent to the Reidsville prison, I believe it was, the Reidsville prison, it was for a minor offense, and he was possibly going to be placed in the Reidsville prison for this incredible minor offense. I think it was something dealing with a parking ticket or something of that nature, something insane, for almost a year. But they had a rally at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Daddy King at the time was more of a leaning on the Republican side because that's what Black people did who were older. And it was Robert Kennedy who made a few phone calls and put pressure on, I believe it was the DeKalb County authorities in reference to finding where Dr. King was. He was supposed to be at the Reidsville prison, from my understanding. And Daddy King announced at that moment that I'm taking off my Nixon button, I'm putting on a Kennedy button. And from my understanding, Kennedy won by by less than 100 votes per precinct in Georgia. And so my father said Dr. King elected from a prison John F. Kennedy, and then Lyndon Baines Johnson is elected, well, not first elected, but is able to continue and then elected because of the passing of the Voting Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act. And so then that act elects him. But he brings to the point of talking about Jimmy Carter, who heard Dr. King in a speech when he was very small, and decided to run for governor and then eventually run for president. And he says that from his grave, he elected a governor and a president, which then influenced a minister by the name of Jesse Jackson to run for president, who brought 8 million people to be registered, which then allowed Bill Clinton to become president because of those 8 million people who were not a part of the electorate, which then set the stage for Barack Obama to become president. Point being that one, less than 100 people per precinct in the 1960s set the stage for the first African-American president in the U.S. history. So voting is important.
How profound that is. It is all true, and it's wonderful. And thank you for bringing that out. And you said it so effectively.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you, Sister Clayton. Thank you very much.
A beautiful picture, and that's exactly what happened. And I didn't realize until just recently that when they transferred Dr. King that night, nobody knew where he was. His wife didn't. Nobody knew. They did it in the night. Quietness. Nobody knew where he was, and they put him in the trunk of the police car with a big, ferocious bulldog. That bulldog could act on a sight, not a sound, on sight. And Dr. King was petrified, and I didn't realize that until later that he was so afraid that he really couldn't do much for a while. He was almost paralyzed from the fear, because that dog was laying right beside him. And all he had to do was breathe loudly, and on order he was to attack. That was awful. He said it was the longest ride he's ever had in life, and the scariest, the most frightening moment he's ever endured.
And we just have one more question from Daryl Shagardis. Daryl, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. First of all, let me express my extreme gratitude for this profound discussion. It is amazing. And I plan to do something with all this as well with other people. But my question is, I'm reflecting on the statement, if you change a man's heart, you can change his behavior. So how do we change the heart of the alt-right, the evangelical right, of all people? And I'm reflecting on the fact that one of the ways that I've seen and that we can focus on the heart and move the heart and get off the habit of changing the mind, the ideas, is the use of the arts. Music, drama, stories portrayed by artists representative of all people as a way to do this, like the Collaborative Arts Ensemble and the Peace Studio, very profound. What are their ways? What are other ways to do this?
Might just jump in real quick. I said I might joke and just say that some of the folk on the alt-right, I'm not sure they may need a whole heart transplant.
That's one way, right?
Reference to it. And for some, I don't know if you can change the heart, but what we can do, I think, what you made the statement about the arts. It's not about changing the heart of the alt-right. It's about putting the right music in the hands of those who believe in love and justice. And if they play the right song, it will drown out the hate on the other side.
Gee, that's profound, but so are you.
You're so kind, Sister Clayton.
Did anyone else want to chime in to respond to that question?
You know, I think to change a person's heart, you have to introduce them to something other than hate. You have to be introduced to love, because love will actually overrule hate if you accept it. You have to accept love to move hate out. And most of the people that grew up hating, it was instilled in them by generations. Once they've been taught how to love and realizing that love would get them much further than hate, it would be kind of an easy transition to change from hate to love. Love is sweet. Hate is very painful.
I
I think that's
add to what Mr. Lewis said and say that I don't think this is something that's all about reason. Maybe it's not mainly about reason. It's about experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's about taking the risk of building bridges with people who are different than you, who may not agree with you, who may take the same set of facts and come at it from a different, come to different conclusions. And I will say is I'm a loyal Democrat. I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat, but Democrats get on my last nerve. And one of the reasons is that we seem to think that respect for the separation of church and state means we cannot use the language of faith, when in fact the objectives and the values of faith are central to our policy agenda. And I think that was one of the things that John Lewis did so brilliantly, and a tradition he came from. And I wish that that more of us in our party brought that, because I think it would help people move to the experiential, and from there to love.
love is sweet and using the language of faith. I think this is a great place to end this panel. I first, of course, want to thank this all-star panel with the depth of knowledge and wisdom, letting love guide and the memory of John Lewis guiding us all, but also to our audience who joined us today. You could be a lot of places on this Monday afternoon, but you're here with us, and that means a lot. So thank you very much. It was an honor and pleasure to be your moderator. I'd like to kick it back to Tom West.
Thank you, Tremaine. And yes, thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And I hope that you will tune in to the rest of our events today. We have an amazing series of events this afternoon at 1:30, 3:30, another event at 6 o'clock, and then ending with a big gala tonight at 8 o'clock, live streamed on Now This. So thank you all.